Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, one of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going weekly video games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. Back with another episode of the Games Memo. This is the Games Memo for 12 June 2026, and I guess we got to talk about some things. Not necessarily things that I really wanted to talk about. I actually had a relatively different agenda set up for tonight, but I went looking for one of the articles, and for whatever reason, one of the articles didn't load. I actually wanted to talk a little bit about the bug on Xbox, apparently, where the devs are recommending that Playground Studios is recommending that you don't use Quick Resume with Forza Horizon 6. So I kind of wanted to pull the thread on that and talk about it. But for some reason, that article on IGN wouldn't load. So I started looking around, panning around for more recent news articles, and a lot of Xbox stuff started kind of falling off the bone. And we had already talked a little bit about what had gone on with the post-showcase Xbox news earlier in the week on Thrifty's show, The Gamer's Den. But it seems like more stuff has come out since then. And so I guess we are, fortunately or unfortunately, going to have to talk about that a little bit more tonight. So let me get the social media out real quick. I actually had to run out of the studio real quick to do something while the intro music was playing. So let me get the social media out real quick, and we will get things started. All right, thanks a lot. First news story in the rundown is this news story over on Vice.com. The Elder Scrolls 6 gets first development update in 8 years. And so this is going to kind of be a journey tonight because the story starts off relatively benign and somewhat innocent, and then things kind of unravel from there. So this report states that Xbox Chief Content Officer Matt Booty has provided the first meaningful public update. Actually, I'm going to start a little bit with a quote from the article at the top. Microsoft has given us the first update on Elder Scrolls 6 for the first time in over 8 years. In a recent interview about the Elder Scrolls 6, Xbox executive Matt Booty revealed new development details about the much-anticipated Bethesda RPG. Here's the latest information about Elder Scrolls 6 from Microsoft. This news story, like I said, over on Vice.com by Brent Coop, by the way. Xbox Chief Content Officer Matt Booty has provided the first meaningful public update on the Elder Scrolls 6 since its 2018 reveal, saying he has seen the game running at Bethesda and that it looks, quote, looks amazing, end quote, and is progressing well. The article notes that Microsoft and Bethesda acknowledge the game was announced far too early and are deliberately waiting until it is ready before showing gameplay or sharing major details. It also highlights previous comments from Todd Howard indicating that the game is now fully playable internally and that Bethesda's resources are largely focused on the project following work on Starfield. While the update confirms active development and reassures fans that progress is being made, Microsoft provided no release window, gameplay footage, setting details, or other concrete information, leaving the game's launch timeline uncertain. All right, and Real Innate checks into the live chat. Thank you so much, Innate, for coming by. Sorry, it's a bad allergy night, so a little stuffy. So as I pulled this docket together for tonight, I was trying really hard not to label this episode as the I Don't Care episode. Now, originally my slate had this news on the Elder Scrolls. It also had some news talking about, again, like I said, not to use Quick Resume for Forza Horizon 6. Yet another topic I don't personally really care about because I've used Quick Resume like a grand total of like 2 times in 6 years. The other article was talking about how Valor Mortis has moved from September into October because of GTA 6. It was kind of yet another I don't care moment because I don't plan on playing GTA 6, and so I've got my whole month of November free. So all those games that are stacked up in September and October, I'm just going to play them in November for anything that I was too busy to get to in the month of September or October. So And that's, but let's go back to like what I did actually put in the slate, and this is kind of where I am about Elder Scrolls 6. Let's walk through why. In my opinion, and some people are going to take offense at this, Bethesda, in my mind, has always been given a pass by its diehard fans, long before it was acquired by Xbox. And so my negative feelings about how Bethesda Studios kind of approaches games has been there for quite some time. Let me check up on the chat real quick. Real Nate says, I'm all about Elder Scrolls 6. Hope we see it soon. Josh Ayers checks into the chat as well. Thanks so much, Josh, for swinging by. RPG88, we appreciate you. Real Nate says, I keep telling people quick resume is dangerous. And then Josh Ayers says it moved to get out of September for Valar Mortis. So back to Elder Scrolls 6. I've long felt that the kind of rabid fandom around Bethesda has long given them a pass. And there are some rabid fandoms out there. The Final Fantasy community, the Kingdom Hearts community is just completely like in a really strange square. The Xbox community, and certain other communities, right? Let's talk about less about platform communities and more about kind of game or studio communities. And some of them give a pass. And long since, Todd Howard has been coming on stage in the leather jacket and yada, 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 before, 2020, I said, look, you guys are going to let this, this goodwill that you keep giving them accumulate, and eventually you're going to pay for it. And that's kind of what we had with Fallout 76. So when it comes to Bethesda, in my personal opinion, the bugs aren't charming, as people refer to them. Then when you talk about how the games land on PlayStation, there are game-stopping bugs, game save file corrupting bugs. Those aren't charming bugs. Those are problematic bugs. Those are bugs that are unacceptably outside the window of quality. And then, so you get all the way up to Fallout 76, and then you have the day before the game was launched, Todd Howard puts out a memo. And in my opinion, what that memo basically said to you is that, hey, Fallout 76 is a beta, and you're going to be paying to help us play test it and finish the game. We hope you come along with us and enjoy the ride. And I'm like, this memo is a thing that drops the day before the thing. So you have people who have pre-ordered it, and then it's finally kind of fully laid out on the table that this is basically a game as a service, and you're going to be, the game's incomplete. We're gonna iterate upon it, once it's live based on your feedback. And I'm like, that's the type of thing that goes into early access. I think back then maybe early access wasn't quite as normalized for games as a service, particularly for MMO type things. And Fallout 76 isn't quite an MMO, but it definitely kind of leans in that direction. And again, this is a thing that I feel like Bethesda was emboldened to do because of the fan base it has. Today, they refuse to move off of Creation Engine. And so all of their games coming out, including Starfield, have the same kind of endemic problems that are inherent components of the design base of that game that they can't get out of the way of. Like, those things are going to be there in the Elder Scrolls 6. So again, I wasn't happy with the performance that I got in Starfield. I don't think that they're going to be able to surmount those problems by the modifications that they've done to Creation Engine for Elder Scrolls 6. So I don't plan on going along with them for that ride yet again. I personally am not on the edge of my seat for Elder Scrolls 6. Starfield was not a design-forward game. It was not a leap. It was not a major progression beyond kind of what a Bethesda Studios game is. And I believe that Elder Scrolls 6 is going to have the same trappings. So in the chat, it has always got a pass, and I'm a fan. Well, and I'm glad that like you can admit that. Look, there are things that I give studios a pass for that I let go. But like recognizing and acknowledging that reality of like what's going to happen if you continue to do that is an important matter of self-awareness, I think. Real Nate says the Final Fantasy community will make an excuse for anything they release, so I agree. Josh Ayers says I fall into that Square community, but I try not to discuss it unless prompted. Real Nate says, agreed Fallout 76 was a mess. Josh says 76 was wild. Real Nate says, no NPCs. Y'all are good with that, right? Years later, we are adding NPCs. Josh Ayers, Sony got dragged in front of the Australian Consumer Commission for Fallout 76 refunds. Real Nate says, I agree the Fallout 76 community alone are super defensive despite all those clear exploitation strategies that game deploys. Now, at the end of the day, right, I would kind of talk about Fallout 76 kind of the same way that I talk about an Ubisoft game. Like, that game has improved. People seem to be much more satisfied with it now than they were when it launched. If you go to Steam community reviews, it is highly praised. But, it was a long road to get there. So, the notion that we're getting an update today, I don't personally care. Like, you can choose Elder Scrolls 6 like whenever you feel like dropping it. It doesn't really matter to me. It is something that maybe I'll buy, when they've Skyrim'd it and it comes out like in some mega collection, and a bunch of DLC is there, and it's sold for $40 or whatever, or it goes on some ridiculous Steam sale. Then I'll get in. And so, guys in the chat, if the music is too loud, please let me know. I'm going to take a break here and get a spot of coffee before we get into some numbers and some strategy discussion of what's going on with Xbox. Okay, and Josh says the music is good. Let's go on to the second news story. Xbox Studio shutdowns and ad-funded subscriptions likely after Asha Sharma's stark reset warning, analysts say. This news story over on IGN by Tom Phillips. So really quickly, I'll start quoting the top intro of the article. Xbox will likely undergo studio shutdowns and consider ad-supported subscription models following newly installed CEO Asha Sharma's blunt warning that a corporate reset was now necessary. Gaming analysts have told IGN. Sharma's memo to Xbox employees, subsequently published publicly online, painted an unflinching portrait of the problems facing Microsoft's gaming division and made it clear that difficult decisions were now necessary in the coming days. Difficult decisions are now necessary, as if this just happened this week. Indeed, the memo's arrival prompted a report by Bloomberg that suggested a wave of layoffs would arrive as soon as next month, bringing excitement around the brand crashing back to earth after an encouraging Xbox game showcase, which included peeks at numerous upcoming blockbusters and some games being earmarked as console exclusives. So the article goes on to argue that analysts view recent comments from Xbox CEO Asha Sharma and Chief Content Officer Matt Booty as a warning that significant changes are coming to Xbox's business model following Sharma's Xbox Reset memo, which revealed shrinking revenues, a roughly 3% operating margin, more than $20 billion spent on content, platform, and hardware initiatives, and rising hardware costs. Analysts believe Microsoft is likely to pursue cost-cutting measures such as layoffs, studio closures, and a reassessment of its development portfolio. The article also suggests Xbox may experiment with new revenue models, including ad-supported subscription tiers, alternative Game Pass offerings, OEM-produced Xbox hardware, and other strategies aimed at lowering consumer costs while improving profitability. The broader takeaway is that Xbox leadership believes its current business structure is unsustainable and is preparing a substantial restructuring to adapt to declining console sales, changing player behavior, and mounting economic pressures across the gaming industry. I see some of you guys in chat who know me or know, the things that I've spoken on for the last few years. I see a lot of things in this article and a lot of things that analysts are saying that are things that I've been saying for 5 years. And I see lots of people reacting to it as if it's new, as if it's some epiphany, some Moses came down from the mountain with the tablets. I have been telling people this for a very, very, very long time, and so there's going to be a lot of I told you so's tonight. There is a huge I told you so in all of this. First of all, let's go back to the multiple years of Game Pass is profitable, which was an escalation from the first time it was mentioned, which was that Game Pass was sustainable. Then it became Game Pass is profitable. And I tried to tell people, there is a difference between, and I tried to explain to people, there is a difference between the balance sheet and what gets filed with the SEC and what we call total cost accounting. Total cost accounting racks up other costs that are incurred to run a business. It racks up overhead costs, that are not necessarily included. So when you get assistance from another division, say like cloud spend, like your workloads are being hosted on the Azure division's right equipment and services, and that is not given to you as a cost. That is total cost accounting. That type of thing doesn't show up on a balance sheet, but it absolutely shows up when the financial people are doing deep analysis and there's really a reckoning and accounting of what it takes to run the business. If you're getting help from the advanced technology people in the CTO's organization, or if R&D costs are going to help give you a leg up, right, and help prop up the business, those things don't necessarily show up on the balance sheet in your business unit or business division. They're not necessarily part of your P&L, but they are chalked up somewhere else, and sometimes they will wind up being tallied up as overhead costs. Those are parts of the cost of doing business. And so just saying Game Pass is profitable because it says it on the balance sheet doesn't give you insight into total cost accounting. Total cost accounting is the thing that only people who are running deep financial analysis sheets inside the organization have visibility on. I've mentioned to people that this is the key thing that I've been directly a part of. We entered into an exclusive agreement with one of the large CSPs, and the marketing people and the deal banking people who were trying to make this a big thing were briefing costs that didn't account for everything. They didn't account for the assistance we were being given out of the CTO division. They didn't account for the huge amount of money that was going into building out a new lab facility that included HPC workloads and NVIDIA GPUs at $20,000 to $35,000 a pop. So my brief did include all those things in total cost accounting, and it showed that this venture was not as profitable as the C-suite was being led to believe. So again, TCA racks up all those costs. And when you say Game Pass is profitable, you can really only make an SEC level balance sheet statement, and that statement's valid. And when a C level officer says that in a public interview, they're telling the truth. They can't be legally held accountable for lying. However, the truth that is revealed in total cost accounting is where you're really going to see the cost of everything that it takes to make the business go. And that is not something that the public has been exposed to yet. And so the people who have been on the war wagon about Game Pass being profitable, you don't have all the information to truly holistically assert that as a ground truth. You don't have all the information. But I can absolutely guarantee you without question, all of the costs that it takes to make Game Pass as a business go are not revealed on that SEC balance sheet. Let's talk a little bit about the costs that are being incurred by the Xbox division and driving them to this state. Let's catch up with chat a little bit. Josh here says that's $20 billion excluding ABK and Bethesda. Correct, Josh. Yeah, I didn't mention that. So obviously the investment for ABK was $70 billion. Now you said excluding ABK and Bethesda. I thought it included Bethesda, but at any rate, Bethesda was another $8 billion or so. So, $80 billion that are not being included in the $20 billion. And the $20 billion is being spent on things like acquiring licenses for content. And additional hardware probably for build out for supporting the workloads. The Real Nate says, I asked the group chat I was in, right, and I'm sorry, my allergies are bad, so my eyes are watering, so it's hard for me to read the chat. I asked the group chat I was in, why are y'all ready to die with Xbox, but y'all draw the lines at PlayStation fans supporting those games until Xbox can't stand on its own again? Real Nate says, facts, we've been saying this for years. Mr. Throwback 5, the pain is real, man. Xbox fans can't let it go. Tesher says, you deserve the I told you so's. Mr. Throwback, oh man, I'm going back to college with my accounting classes. Yeah, and that's, I hate to bring up a personal note, but, obviously, as I've said these things over the years, people have said, you're a PlayStation fanboy. And I'm like, no, I just took a graduate course in financial management and have a graduate degree in it. And when, and if you're not familiar with financial management coursework, it's essentially the exact same course work as an MBA. But the key difference is that when MBAs take like 4 quarters of marketing, financial management majors take 4 quarters of accounting. And so we take an accounting course that sets us up to take the CPA exam. I never took the CPA exam, but that's the academic coursework that I went through. Josh Ayers, would investors be more briefed on this than the public? Yes, investors would absolutely have visibility and insight into TCA, because I'm sure it would be briefed. Again, senior level investors. I mean, when we say investors, we're talking about like board members. Go back. I'm still shocked Asha offered the 3% accountability margin. You don't say that unless the hammer is going to. Yeah, we'll get into that. Thanks a lot, Rachie, for checking in. Switch to Bayonet. Gooners will be very happy. So let's talk about some of the costs around Undead Labs as an example, as a case study. So State of Decay was revealed in 2020. It has now been 6 years. It'll be 7 years by the time it releases. That game did not enter full production until 2022. So when you talk about game development, you have these phases of game development. And so essentially, just to break it down, just to bifurcate it, you have pre-production and then you have production. Pre-production is pretty much at the state where you cannot take a set of user stories and hand them over to a bunch of developers, like an army of developers, and have them go away and do implementation at scale and at high velocity. You have so much that is not yet fully defined, and you have frameworks that aren't set, that you could only hand that development to a very small amount of developers who can't necessarily decompose the work into chunks that, like, a large number of small teams can go off and implement. You're still constantly kind of running back and forth with the design doc, still nailing down parts of the architecture. So you're in pre-production. So the point is, you can't scale up. You can't level up and employ like a full team. The headcount at Undead Labs is about 120 people. It's about somewhere between 110 and 130. So I'm just going to ballpark it at 120. If the average salary for a worker at that studio is $100K, then you were spending $14.4 million a year to maintain that studio. Xbox bought that studio in Microsoft bought that studio in 2018. So it has now been 8 years since they bought that studio. State of Decay 2 came out in 2018. So you start pre-production right later that year. Xbox buys them. Microsoft buys them. By the time that game lands, it will have been 9 years. That is almost a decade. State of Decay 3 is out in 2027. In 9 years, you have spent $130 million to own that studio. Add to that whatever you spent to acquire them, right? $130 million? I was going to say that that's not necessarily the budget of that game, but that probably is right around the budget of that game. You spent $130 million. You're going to wind up putting that... And by the way, you're spending that money that's, some mixture of capital expenses on the project, plus whatever overhead costs are associated with owning that lab. You're paying benefits for all of those people. You can't recognize revenue for anything that studio has done with regards to State of Decay 3, right? You're recognizing residual revenue off of State of Decay 2. I think State of Decay 2 had some DLC, I guess. I'm not sure if it was paid DLC. I don't know. I'm not a State of Decay fan. But you're recognizing very little revenue in comparison to what you're paying to maintain that studio. You spent $130 million. You've spent 9 years in development. You're not going to put it on sale till 2027. And when you put it on sale, large numbers of people are not going to buy it because they're going to consume it through Game Pass. You should easily be able to understand the upside down situation that's going to put you in from a financial perspective. You're paying a huge amount, and that's one studio. And Xbox owns upwards of 20 studios, 23 studios. I forget how many they've closed. Like at the end of the Activision acquisition, I think the number was like 33 studios. And then since they've closed, a significant number, they've laid off around 4,500 employees. And as far as we can tell, all indications and warning are that they're going to lay off a bunch more. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But you're spending a ton of money to maintain these studios and not recognizing revenue, not making the sales that really equates to what you need to run such a large-scale production organization. Let's talk a little bit about 3% margin. compared to the target of 30%. Now, the 30% was a per software title target. It was not necessarily a whole business unit target, but obviously software represents the bulk of what software and services represents the bulk of what that division does. Hardware is, nothing. Revisiting that 30% target, Microsoft came out and denied that was a thing in fall of 2025. In January of 2026, the Bloomberg interview with Obsidian Studios acknowledged that there was a 30% margin target. So that thing is out there. I know Sharma has been on record saying, well, my target's not 30. Okay, maybe your target's not 30%. Her mandate's not 30%. Maybe your mandate's not 30% at the business unit level, but it is on a per title software level. And yes, yea, verily, I admit, even when I parse and read how the Obsidian studio had talked about the 30% margin, it's not a hard and fast. Like, I don't believe that anybody's, being put in front of a firing squad when your game doesn't hit 30%. But when it doesn't hit 30%, you're asked a bunch of questions, and you're told to explain why it's not hitting 30%. And the reasons are things that then I am sure that they seek to avoid and things that they expect you to improve upon. She is at 3% margin. So let's talk about a little bit about what that means. That means for every dollar of sales that you make, you are making back 3 cents. You are almost operating a business at cost. We're talking about you are operating a business that is like an Android handset manufacturer. And I'm not talking about Samsung. I'm talking about people who are selling, who are giving Android handsets away for free, right? I mean, let's talk about that. You are operating almost alike and in close proximity to businesses that give stuff away for free, which is essentially what you've been doing with Game Pass, right? To a certain extent, you've been giving content away at a cost, at a price that doesn't equate to your cost that it takes to actually fully run that business. You're making 3 cents for every dollar you sell, almost operating at cost. That should be a stark, earth-rattling conclusion and reveal to what's going on at Xbox. Should be outright scary. Let's talk a little bit about we'll come back to that. I want to talk a little bit about what happens to businesses who operate at 3% margin. I also want to kind of take a look at, when we talk about some of the things that people are saying might happen, I want to use HP as a case study. So HP took its business, which was a full-up business, did both enterprise and consumer, but recognized that they needed to make a major change, and so they split their businesses. And so HP Consumer is now a completely separate business, entirely different LLC and entity from HP Enterprise. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. A lot of people are talking now about like studios might close, and I quite honestly don't know today who those studios might be. Before we get into that a little bit, let's catch up with the chat. Josh Ayer says, to make that 130 million, you need about 2 million sales, but that's off getting 100% of a sales price, which doesn't happen on Steam. Right, because they're putting it on Steam at 30%, losing 30% to Steam with revenue share. Real Nate says, agreed. They got to get game development out of California. It's killing them. North Carolina sounds good. Yeah, I mean, that could be part of it. Which, what I fear is that may mean trying to offshore the development, right? Try to do more development outside of the United States. Richie says they're operating like Walmart. I mean, you're not entirely wrong. Real Nate, the cost to run Game Pass is crazy. Okay. So the studios that might be closed, quite honestly, I am now struggling with this. So you can go back 6, 7, 8 months ago, kind of going back to the tail end of 2025. I said that game studio closures were coming. Now, at the time, I said they were basically any studio that's not engaged in making like a big, like a major title, right? And what I mean by that is people not making like Call of Duty type stuff, like big AAA Elder Scrolls level stuff. People who aren't making these types of titles that Xbox at the time said like they were going to have to crunch down on. The World of Warcraft, Overwatch, that type of stuff. Things that are not selling at scale and making revenue at scale. So at the tail end of last year, I said, look, the studios that I see as being in danger are Compulsion, In Exile once Clockwork is out, Ninja Theory, and Undead Labs. You could also combine Double Fine in there, but since then, what I have said my personal perspective is because Double Fine is a historical studio that has a ton of gravitas behind it, like Obsidian. I think whatever you're going to do with Double Fine is you're not going to close Double Fine. I believe that they will release Double Fine. They will give them a Toys for Bob deal. They will spin them out. They will let somebody else acquire them. I don't think that they will make the move of shutting down Double Fine because the way you would be treated by the industry would be, in my opinion, catastrophic. Double Fine does a ton for indie developers. They host the day of that Day of the Devs thing that happens after Summer Games Fest is hosted by Double Fine. I just think that they have way too much entrenchment right in the gaming industry for something like that to be forgiven. So today, I would say again, Compulsion, In Exile, Ninja, Undead Labs. Now, the showcase, in my opinion, kind of tilted that formula on its head because now Ninja has Senua and they have it in pipeline and it has pages up. That's not necessarily to say that other studios haven't been closed, but now I kind of look at Ninja Theory and I say, well, I mean, they're working on something. It's and it's not. I don't believe it's paper mache and smoke and mirrors like the Initiative and Perfect Dark, right? I think Ninja Theory actually has a real game that they're actually working on. Undead now has a commitment to get State of Decay out in 2027. I don't know that Undead Labs couldn't be put in a situation where it's like, hey, when you get that game out, you're going to be shut down. But of course, that's not a thing that you say to the devs who are finalizing the game because you're pretty much guaranteed that you're going to get a game that's not going to be the level of quality that it needs to be. So what are they going to do? Like, if you only have two, so you really, at that point, you really only have one studio that you could really put on the chopping block, and that would be Compulsion. And that may be the route that they go. Like, they could shut down Compulsion. I think what will happen is a lot of consolidation. I have long said, like, if you're going to put together, like, a huge production organization like this, it doesn't, like, to me, like, let's just take it at a, like, very, very simple, basic, like, IT level. It makes no sense to me for everybody to have their own army of DevOps people. Like that's, take all the DevOps people, put them in a shared resource center, separate them from the studios, give them their own management, and make everybody share that resource, right? Employ technical commonality and have everybody use the same tools, the same production pipeline, all that type of stuff. And this is the type of stuff that Sharma talked about in her Day 30 letter. She talked about the fact that things like that, utilities, tooling, basic, common, recurring IT tasks spread across the organization were being done inefficiently. They were being done over and over and over again, separately, by different people, and they weren't using repeatability, which is like a common, like if you're a systems engineer, and in particularly if you're a certified systems engineering professional and you've come up through NCOSE, then one of the key tenets of systems engineering is that you make things repeatable. And by that repeatability, you make them reliable. And by making them repeatable and reliable, you up your quality. And you become less dependent on heroes, which again is an exact thing that she said in her memo. And this has been a mantra of mine through 3 decades of system engineering management, software engineering management, is that when you rely on heroes, things can fall down. When you rely on processes, then you at least have some reliability that you can ride through when you don't have A-team heroes available for every team. And so I think Ms. Sharma is finding that lesson out. So So which studios are they going to close? Like I said, I think that you're going to see maybe more sort of a combining of studios, a reorg. I think they're going to be taking people from jobs in certain studios and consolidating them and putting them again in some type of shared resource center. When you look at Bethesda and Activision, and I didn't have a chance to look as closely at Activision, but I could see at Bethesda things like consolidating id and Machine Games, who make, quite honestly, very super similar games, and where if you did consolidate them, you would get something like a slight lift in technical implementation on the id side with a skosh more storytelling capability for the Machine Game side. Again, Machine Games is not writing like operatic movements, right? They're not writing, Broadway musicals, but they are, telling. They are doing more storytelling than you get in an id game, which is, Doom is kind of a bunch of grunts, and muscle flexing, So but I could see where those two studios could be combined. Now, of course, Machine Games did kind of do a slight level up with Indiana Jones, but I also think Indiana Jones was incredibly narrow in scope in terms of its combat in air quotes. So again, I could see those two studios being combined. When we talk about spend, one of the things that I say is, we started this segment off talking about Bethesda. The way Bethesda Game Studios makes games does not work in this type of fiscal environment. The headcount of Bethesda is about 450 people. So take the math that I walked you through for Undead Labs and apply that to Bethesda and look at when The Elder Scrolls was announced. And we're still like in a window where there's no discussion of when Elder Scrolls is actually going to come out. Now, obviously, they have teams that have been doing stuff. They have Fallout 76 going kind of as a service. They have Starfield, which made pretty good revenue probably, but given the way the DLC kind of landed with a thud, and the way that, in my opinion, the evidence that we're seeing is Starfield, in my opinion, didn't have a huge revenue earning tail beyond the launch window. So it struck it big when it launched. It struck pretty well when it landed on PlayStation 5. But I don't think it's had a super long tail. When you dig into the supplemental information in the Sony earnings reports and you look at something like God of War 2018 and you see how well that thing has sold 3, 4, 5 years beyond the launch window, I don't think that's the way Starfield is performing. So again, the small studios, to me, clearly have a cost profile that doesn't match what Xbox is earning. And the large kind of Death Star size studios are even worse. Again, given the fact that people are consuming a lot of their games through Game Pass. And then we're entering a window where people are talking about the Elder Scrolls being exclusive. And I'm like, are you insane? Like, the amount of cost that it's taking to run that studio and produce Elder Scrolls 6 as a project, and you're talking about putting it on a platform where you're only going to sell it to 35 million people, and those 35 million people are largely going to consume it through Game Pass. And yes, you're going to put it on PC, and that's where you're going to, if you have any success, that's where you're going to have it. But to me, it's sheer madness to talk about not exposing that game to an addressable market of 90 million users. Before we get into talk about exclusives, let's catch up with the chat one more time. Real Nate says, if State of Decay 3 is the game it needs to be, they will be fine, but I won't know till I get my hands on it. Yeah, I did mention the dev ops consolidation thing, and that's smart. I have big faith in the Undead Labs team. They make great zombie games, and I'm sure it will be way less buggy than State of Decay 2. E-Nate, this is me looking at you with the side eye, wondering how you feel so bullish that it will be less buggy than State of Decay 2. Josh Ayers says, man, we need a Wolfenstein Broadway show now. Rachie says, I hope Compulsion is safe. I like South of Midnight a lot, and with the tax benefits in Montreal, I can see it has a plus for cost. Yeah, and like one thing that needs to be understood, because I'm sure certain other fans are going to say something opposite. should they ever see this video. None of this is about how I personally feel. I loved South of Midnight, and I've talked. I won't go into it. I won't gush as much about it tonight, but I talked about how from an ethnicity perspective and from a geocultural perspective, that game is very near and dear to my heart. It is socially, culturally, and ethnically significant to me that game got made. It is important to me that game got made. So what I'm talking about here are just the sheer financial realities, right, that the game division is facing, and what the revenue output of those studios are in comparison to their cost, right, and what's being said about Xbox right now at this time. Jessica says, as COD is no longer on Game Pass, would they downsize the COD teams? And Richie says, Elder Scrolls 6 is far away. Yeah, quite honestly, I don't. I just don't know what's going on with COD. Absolutely possible, but Raven Studios took a hit already. I think Beanox took a little bit of a hit. I haven't heard about like a big schwack. There's a third team who I can't even remember because they're not high on. And Sledgehammer took a hit to the point where, as far as I can tell, Sledgehammer is no longer in the 3-studio rotation, because the only thing I've heard about now, since these things started happening, since the convulsing started happening, is Infinity Ward and Treyarch. Obviously, before the acquisition, the way the production machinery worked was it was Infinity Ward, Treyarch, and Sledgehammer in a 3-year syncopatic rhythm, production cadence. Then there were, even before the acquisition, there were unmanageable tensions between Sledgehammer and I think Raven. And so, Treyarch was ratcheted in. They had that flexibility. Sledgehammer, when they came back in, they weren't doing their own thing. They picked up the Infinity Ward property and moved it incrementally forward. So I get the sense that Sledgehammer is not a primary studio in rotation. So yeah, I could absolutely see Sledgehammer being shut down, and that would alleviate a significant amount of cost, because Sledgehammer is not a small studio, and the amount of cost that they incur is not small. I don't know exactly how many heads they are, but I get the sense that they're, I think they're not an Undead Lab sized team. I would expect that they would be bigger than that. And just to understand, like, how that microcosm operates, how that organism operates. So Raven, surprisingly and amazingly, I feel like Raven never gets their flowers as much as they should. Raven is really kind of the central team of continuity that really glues everything together. Raven does Warzone, but the primary technology base for the rest of Call of Duty, it's inherent in Warzone. Warzone is kind of the sun, right? It's the celestial entity that everything else revolves around and has dependencies on. So like Raven is a team that you can't do without in the like industrial gears of Call of Duty. So they took a hit last time in the round of layoffs. I feel like you can't. Now, that being said, they are probably overstaffed, right? Because of that fact. So I could see I could see causality for them getting hit the first time. But like doing it again, I'm uncertain about that. And I don't know that it would be big, right? If you want to take a big whack out of your costs, I think who you'll wind up going after is Sledgehammer. So one thing I want to mention about exclusivity is, and a lot of you guys have already heard this, right? It's, in my opinion, this is not about exclusivity. The onesie twosie, you're going to get one per year. This is not about exclusives in a way that really drives the business. This is about what I call GNOPs, or games simply not on PlayStation. And that's being done to give fanboys something to crow about on social media. And in my mind, it's that because that's the reason behind it, it's kind of stupid and childish. And when I talk about something like Clockwork Revolution, again, here we go back to a studio that has taken a very long time to get a game out, that probably has a significant cost associated with that title. And you're going to put it on a platform with 35 million people who are largely going to consume it for Game Pass, not expose it to 90 million to a 90 million person addressable market. That's just dumb. I don't know, and again, like, you make that announcement on Sunday, and then you turn around and you put out this 100-day memo saying that the sky is falling. Like, none of that makes it, like, this entire week of marketing this entire week of PR and voice tracking from the Xbox senior leadership team, which has largely been out of sync, right? Between Booty, Sharma, and Matthew Ball, I'm not necessarily hearing a harmonious message. None of that makes any fiscal sense. OEM hardware, I think, is a thing that makes fiscal sense. And I've talked about this before. For a very long time, I've said, I think that the intent is for Xbox to license out whatever the next Xbox is to Microsoft's typical cadre of laptop vendor partners. So Dell, Alienware, Samsung. Yes, I know Dell and Alienware are technically the same company, but they make differentiated products, which is why I'm separating them. Dell, Alienware, Razer, HP, Samsung, Lenovo, Asus, and Acer. I think that these OEMs will take on putting out Xboxes, and so you will get different models, different SKUs of Xbox. I think one of the reasons you do that is because when we go back to this discussion that Sharma is having, and she's talking about the cost of procuring SSDs, the cost of procuring RAM, Microsoft, because it only runs a boutique business for hardware in its Microsoft Surface line, isn't buying those things at scale. One of the problems that we know that has impacted getting Xboxes out the door, which again kind of makes the statements. I think Matthew Ball made them, or maybe Sharma is saying them too. Maybe that's one of the things that they've said that have been in sync. Is that they can't get enough Xboxes out to meet demand, which is entirely a ludicrous, idiotic statement. That you, again, this is now we've delved back to the point of them talking to people like they're stupid. That reason is not because the demand is so high. That reason is because Microsoft is not producing Xboxes at volume. They're not producing them like PlayStation is trying to sell them. They're definitely not producing them like Nintendo is trying to sell their console. They are producing them at a slow rate. That means when you go to a manufacturing shop and you say, hey, I want to build, 1,000 Xboxes, and the manufacturing shop, right, Foxconn says, sure, I got to find a place for you in my schedule. I'm trying to crank out all these iPhones, right, and all these PlayStations, and all these other electronics that are in high demand, and I'm barely keeping up in getting those outputs. Sure, I'll try and find a corner of the factory floor to pump you out 1,000 Xboxes, but it's going to cost you a lot. It's going to cost you a lot more than it costs PlayStation to make a PlayStation. It's going to cost you a lot more than it takes Apple to crank out an iPhone, or Samsung to crank out a Galaxy phone, because you're not giving them an order at scale. So you're not getting volume discounts. That means for your raw components, you're not getting volume discounts. Lenovo can go buy SSDs. Apple can go buy SSDs. They're not going to farm it out to Apple, so I shouldn't say them. Dell, for instance, HP, they can go buy SSDs at super large volumes and get huge volume discounts. Why? Because they're selling millions of laptops a year. And so it makes absolute sense for them to have those laptop vendors make Xboxes. It makes way more sense to do that than for them to produce them themselves. So I think when she's talking about different business models and different approaches to how you run the Xbox business, I absolutely think that that's what's going to happen. Me personally, as a technologist, I don't dislike that idea. I've commented a lot, since we've been talking about Project Helix in the days before we even knew it was called Project Helix. I would be ecstatic if Razer made an Xbox, because they're not going to build a baseline Xbox. They're going to build an Xbox, right, hopped up on steroids, right, with a lot of power. It's going to be expensive, but they're going to build a more capable Xbox than Microsoft would. And I'm hoping that that's the intention. I'm hoping that, and she's talked about Project Helix being the reference model, right? You don't talk about a thing being a reference model unless you're planning on having other people build a thing that you allow them to modify beyond the reference. there's no point in having a reference model unless you have things that are not the reference model. So I'm pretty sure that that's the plan that is in the works. But Razer, the notion of an HP Omen Xbox, I think, is pretty exciting. The notion of an Alienware Xbox is damned exciting, because these things are going to be hopped up on steroids. I think when she's also talking about, there's been a lot of discussion about Project Helix this week, and a lot of voice tracking that tells me that they're talking about walking it back and scaling it back from this notion of it's going to be this uber powerful box, because it kind of doesn't really make sense to build a super powerful machine that you're going to have fewer studios making games for that can't take advantage of all that power, and you're talking about only selling it to 9 to 10 million people. Maybe that doesn't make sense in a world where now SSDs cost radically more than you thought they were going to cost, and RAM costs radically more than you thought it was going to cost. But maybe it's okay for Asus to do that and for Alienware to do that, because again, they're buying RAM for all of their other laptops and AIO desktops and other machines that they build. So I think that's the way this thing may be heading. Let's catch up with chat before we go into the second to last section. Yeah, I'm trying to keep things briefer than my game memo episodes usually are. Hero Down Under, Xbox execs love to insult people's intelligence. Thanks so much, Hero, by the way, for stopping through. Yeah, I'm going to have to wipe my eyes here in a second. Hero Down Under, I can't believe the audience is that dumb. People have lost deductive reasoning. Josh Ayers, she said by the end of the year. Yeah, no, I didn't say the Series X was incapable. I'm not sure if, Rachel, you're talking to me. I think the Series S is an anchor, but I've also said the anchor around the entire gaming industry is really 8 gigabyte GPUs that are being put in PCs. Here it another says like a Ferrari tied down to a rock. Okay, let's go into the next section. Also, let me take a break because I got to clear my eyes. Like I'm getting to a point where I can't even see my MacBook Air. So give me just one second. Yeah, and Rachel, I think you're interpreting what I said too far. Rachel says it doesn't make sense to pair an expensive RAM and SSD on a weak chip. It makes no sense to make low-end hardware anymore. I didn't say low-end hardware. Low-end hardware, in my mind, equates to something like the Switch 2 or below. And I didn't say pair an expensive RAM and SSD with a weak chip. I said scale it back from what it was. The specs that have been released and talked, not released, but the specs that have been talked about for Project Helix are to me are relatively astronomical in comparison to boxes today. And I think there's definitely a mid-stopping point that is not as extravagant as the baseline config has been discussed for Project Helix. That's all I'm saying. So the last news story I want to go over: Xbox CEO reportedly wants to speed up release of next Halo and Fallout games, but spinning off the business entirely is completely off the table. This news story over on Kotaku by Ethan Gatch. Xbox needs hit games, and it needs them more quickly. That's one of new CEO Asha Sharma's main goals as she tries to fix the business, according to a new report from The Information. It cites 3 anonymous sources who claim Phil Spencer's replacement is planning to cut lower-performing studios and projects to invest more resources in the company's major franchises like Halo, Fallout, and The Elder Scrolls. So the article goes on to talk about, again, based on reporting from the information, Microsoft is considering a major overhaul of Xbox under CEO Asha Sharma, including accelerating development of flagship franchises such as Halo, Fallout, and The Elder Scrolls in an effort to strengthen Xbox's content pipeline and improve the division's performance. At the same time, the report claims Microsoft has not ruled out more dramatic structural changes, including spinning Xbox into a wholly owned subsidiary, creating a joint venture, or pursuing other restructuring options that could make the business easier to manage or potentially sell in the future, although no such move is currently planned. The article frames these discussions as part of a broader effort to address Xbox's financial challenges, with Sharma preparing layoffs and cost reductions while simultaneously seeking increased investment in major franchises that can drive engagement, hardware sales, and subscription growth. So, if you were at any other company, a lot of these moves would be prudent, and I could see actually occurring. Like, if Xbox existed at Amazon, Facebook, or Google, I'm pretty sure it would have already been shut down or severely deprecated. But Xbox has continued, but Microsoft has continued down this path for years. They've had points along the road where they could have divested of this, and they didn't. They chose to actually invest more. So I don't personally know that there's like just a straight route to doing the type of thing that I would commonly see and expect at another technology company to offload Xbox. So I don't know or believe that they're necessarily going to go down that path. Before Activision and Bethesda, selling Xbox may have been possible. They were kind of like around a $14 to $16 billion business, like just a skosh ahead of Nintendo. A joint venture also would have been more likely. So creating a JV with another member of the $1 Trillion Club could have been an absolute possibility back then. But in this environment, quite honestly, I don't know that anyone outside of the $1 Trillion Club has the capital base to take on such a large-scale operation. So let's kind of talk through them, right? You've got 6 members of the $1 Trillion Club, one of which is Microsoft. Then you have Amazon, Apple, NVIDIA, Facebook, and Google. Amazon, Facebook, and Google have already made an attempt at running a gaming business at scale and have largely failed. Amazon has scaled that back to like 1 or 2 like real major projects that they're continuing to invest in, and then they've pretty much stopped everything else. Facebook, I can't remember the part of, I think Facebook has shut down, I guess it was called Reality Labs or whatever their VR thing was. If they haven't shut it down, they've definitely made like large scale studio closures, and they're not as bullish on it as they were before, and largely anything else that they're doing is like a meta play. Google obviously had the experience with Stadia. So then you really have Apple and NVIDIA. The way Xbox runs and the products that Xbox puts out and the fact that they are a Microsoft company, Apple's not going to get near them with a 10-foot pole, and what they put out just isn't of the quality characteristic and brand characteristic that is common with kind of Apple products. I can't imagine anything like that occurring, as far as a sale. Certainly can't imagine any type of joint venture that they would get in bed with Microsoft on. NVIDIA is maybe a possibility. I could actually see NVIDIA, I don't know that the NVIDIA would want to run their studios, but I could see some type of joint venture that took Xbox content and paired it with GeForce Now. But, again, I think this is a far, incredible moonshot for that to happen. Not entirely outside the realm of possibility, though. But, the only other way that I could see anything like that happening, kind of as Josh and I talked about in the Discord the other day, like you would have to take a hatchet to the Xbox division, to the Xbox organization first, and separate parts out that you were going to sell. Quite honestly, and I think this is the thing to keep an eye on, if this major reset and this restructuring comes out and looks like what Ubisoft is doing, that is a firm telegraphing to me that there's an intention to sell it off, to sell off pieces. Because what Ubisoft is doing is they're taking like their broad, wide organization and consolidating them into these skinny verticals of less breadth and scope. Prep it, which is the exact type of thing that you do to prep for sale or divestiture. So again, if the Xbox stuff looks like that to me is a sign that they are potentially thinking about and considering moves. And then the other thing I could see is I could see them taking a multi-step approach. So I could see them spinning it off, and then like you can mix and match these phases right in any sequence and order. But they could spin it off. Then the spin-off entity could shut down activities, liquidate, divest, get rid of things. Then they could sell high-value components that were left, larger studios, and then that entity could declare bankruptcy or auction off elements, just like you had when you had the THQ dissolution, right? So something in those sequences, could happen. But again, none of those paths are not fraught with a large degree of complexity and complication, an army of lawyers being engaged, and kind of a no easy way out scenario. So I just don't know. But I think the key thing is, while all of that is going on in the background, how do you continue having a viable business model that produces content? How does Matt Booty, who in my mind is already kind of leadership and management impaired in his position, how does he maintain continuity and still crank out good content while all this is swirling around? Let's also say, as I've been saying for a couple of years, all of this is happening in your workforce, right, is going to feel endangered and insecure about their employment. And you will have a lot of people seeking a way out, becoming flight risks. So, all those things are potential problems. I want to talk a little bit about HP, going back to this whole notion of separation of powers, and how they could get to done if they go down that path. I'll check it on chat a little bit again. Just says Falky has been barking up the tree. Tencent, Saudi, PIF. Yeah, those are all possibilities. NVIDIA Xbox could be monstrous. Inexpensive. Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, those Uber Xboxes that I talked about, Razer, Alienware, they're not going to be cheap. But they, I think they would be very cool. NVIDIA makes sense, but I don't see them taking on the cost. Yeah, here I don't know. And an interesting thing is, of course, Jensen acts really bullish on AI, but at some point, even he might see prudence in kind of padding a backup plan for when the gas goes out of that bag. So I don't know. Here it understands Xbox dribbled themselves into a corner. I hope they sell studios with IP. So HP, and don't, this is just an example, and quite honestly, this is just off of Google search. I didn't have time to pull more threads than that. But let's just kind of hear it out, just so we kind of get it in our heads what it looked like. HP separated its enterprise and consumer business via a tax-free pro rata spinoff, officially finalized in November 2015. The split divided the 75-year-old tech giant into two independent, publicly traded Fortune 100 companies. HP Incorporated retained the original consumer-facing PC and printer business. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise focused on corporate hardware, servers, storage, networking, cloud, and software. The massive restructuring was achieved through the following strategic and logistical steps. Shareholder distribution. HP completed the separation by distributing 100% of the outstanding HPE shares directly to existing HP stockholders. Shareholders essentially received 1 share of HPE for every 1 share of HP they already own. So that's kind of the first big thing. If there's going to be a spinoff, there will be something that is done with the stockholders, where they will then hold a big chunk of Microsoft stock and then a smaller chunk of this thing that would be called Xbox stock. And of course, we would expect them. I would expect the company. I would not expect the company to be called Xbox. I would expect the brand to be called Xbox underneath some type of umbrella name. But who knows? Asha seems to be very beholden to the Xbox name. Separation Management Office. HP established a dedicated 500-person separation management office. So again, and this is for a significantly smaller company than Microsoft. So the size, and this is what I talk about, like all this churn and all this craziness going on in the background, the size of workforce that it will take to manage that type of separation will not be small and will cost Microsoft a pretty penny in getting it done, which is kind of super hilarious given all the money that they spent to get through a year, 15 months of arbitration with the FTC, the CMA, and the EC to get the Activision thing through, and then they're going to turn around potentially and do something right with everything that they bought to separate it from the corporate entity. It's just an incredible case study in wastefulness. HP established a dedicated 500-person separation management office backed by an estimated $1.8 billion to $2 billion budget. This team was tasked with untangling massive global infrastructure, dividing hundreds of facilities in 170 countries, and creating distinct IT networks and bank accounts. And so this is one thing, right? Part of the synergy of what goes on with Xbox, particularly when we talk about Game Pass and now Cloud, which they made a huge bet on, is all that stuff runs on Azure. So if you separate the business, this is going to be this would be a stark thing. Part of the way the competition plays out the way it is because when PlayStation wants to do something on Cloud, when PlayStation wants to do something where it needs workloads hosted, it's paying Amazon to do that. And so there are things that PlayStation just can't do, or wouldn't be prudent for them to do, or when they do, it needs to be understood that they're doing it at a cost, which means if they're doing it, given that they make 1/3 of the revenue in the combined PC and gaming market, that they got to be making like great money, right, to add those features. And they've improved operating margin, right, over the last year. So this team was tasked with but like, so you separate Xbox from Microsoft, who's highly dependent on Azure infrastructure. What does that do to the cost basis of Xbox? Because that's going to go through the roof. If Xbox is now having to pay Microsoft to host its workloads on Azure and becomes just another customer paying for cloud spend, things are going to get brutal. And of course, they will probably get some sweetheart rate, right? But at the end of the day, that's still a cost for them. That is not whatever is coming out of the Xbox P&L center. I assure you, they are not paying full price for its Azure workloads. They are at best they are paying pass-through costs, which are costs without all of these associated overhead, right, and all of the stuff that gets packaged. We call it burdened versus unburdened costs. But I don't even think they're paying unburdened costs as a pass-through to the Azure division. I think they're largely getting it for free. So again, that is a cost that's going to go through the roof, and which means you're not going to be able, if you spin the Xbox business off, they're not going to be able to continue as a whole entity in the way they're currently structured. You would have to divest of stuff in order to be able to afford the stuff that is now going to cost you money. Leadership Division CEO Meg Whitman stepped down from heading the overall corporation to become the CEO of HPE, while Dion Weisler took the helm as CEO of HP Inc. Strategic independence. I think that's a thing to look at too, right? If you spin this business off and it's now a $20 billion business entity sitting off on its own, I quite honestly personally don't know that Asha Sharma continues as CEO, because now you're talking about taking an entity that's standing alone on its own, is responsible for its own SEC filing, is responsible for navigating, right, the legal ways of the world, is responsible for compliance, is responsible for regulatory, right, oversight. She, as far as I can tell, she's an executive in her late 30s. I don't personally think that that's what you do, right, with a business that you cut away that's standing on its own. I think you bring in a what is his name? Hero Down Under probably knows. You bring in an Eric Schmidt, right? You bring in adult supervision to kind of head up that type of entity. Maybe you keep Asha Sharma on as kind of a lower level leader, but at the top you bring in an Eric Schmidt, or really what I mean is kind of like a Strauss Zelnick, right, equivalent. Strategic independence. The goal was to unlock shareholder value and allow each entity to be more nimble. It gave the slower growth PC business financial autonomy to focus on cash flow and new consumer markets like 3D printing, while liberating the enterprise wing to aggressively pursue the fast-moving cloud and data analytics market. I also want to talk about, we talked about the 3% margin. And so I want to talk a little bit about what happens to a business that's operating almost to the point where it's selling things at cost. The Dessayer says, they don't have the cost of Azure. You're under. Asha will leave by early 2028 at the latest. She's moving fast to turn over the business. They have to get a leader who has experience in consumer entertainment. Maybe even someone from Netflix might work. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about what happens to a business that is operating almost at the point where it is selling things at cost. A decline to a 3% operating margin, often called margin compression, leaves a business highly vulnerable because there's almost no financial cushion. Now, some of these things won't be true because currently they have the umbrella of the backing of what I call an incredibly large venture capital backer in Microsoft. But there's almost no financial cushion. Even minor disruptions in sale or slight increases in overhead can plunge the company into the red. Most businesses experiencing. So, I think the takeaway from that is if they're at 3% margin now, the slightest upsetting of the apple cart starts making them a division that's actually losing money, which I think is even more of a crisis than where they currently are. Most businesses experiencing this face the following realities. Vulnerability to shocks. The 3% margin means there is no buffer for emergencies like supply chain cost increases, which they're experiencing now, equipment failures, or sudden spikes in labor costs. Loss of capital for growth. With profits so low, the business lacks the internal cash needed to reinvest in research, marketing, technology, or expansion. Right now, they're subsisting off of the larger entity of Microsoft to get that done. Survival requires massive scale, which they don't have. Businesses with 3% margins, such as grocery stores or high-volume distributors, can only survive by moving massive volumes of inventory to generate high total returns on assets. Risk of going under. If it is a capital-intensive business or one with high fixed overhead, a 3% margin is often unsustainable. Without cost restructuring or price increases, the company will eventually bleed cash and face insolvency. They're doing the opposite. They're taking titles and fencing them off from a 90 million person addressable market. They have cut the cost of Game Pass. You wonder why they're at a 3% margin, right? And they're doing things to make things worse. To avoid this downward spiral, management typically implements margin recovery strategies, analyzing the P&L, auditing specific revenue channels and product lines to identify and cut margin destroyers. Game Pass. Pricing adjustments, raising prices or reducing discounting to pass costs to the consumer. Game Pass. Cost controls, renegotiating vendor terms, improving operational efficiency, and reducing unnecessary overhead. We talked about that a little bit tonight, that probably what will go on with the studios is some consolidation of staff, particularly in terms of commonality and where they're just recurringly doing the same thing over and over again with different groups of people. If you're a business or a company you are analyzing, pinpoint the exact culprit. Again, Game Pass. Draft a strategic plan, which they are in the process of doing. I think the last thing I would say about Asha is I think a thing to be considered, analyzed, and studied is look at the death spiral of the 3 big memos. Look at what she said in her day 1 email. Look at what she said in her I'm just calling it the day 30 email. I don't know, somewhere between day 30 and day 60. And then look at what she says in her day 100 email. Day 1 email. The return of Xbox. We're going to make everybody want to come back here. We're going to reinvigorate the brand. We're going to turn things around. Day 30. Hey, I've gone around and looked at a lot of the studios. It seems like we're doing not really smart stuff. We're doing things over and over again. We don't have reliable repeatability. We don't have good processes. We've got to make some changes. Then day 100, we're at 3% margin. The business is in danger of going under. We're going to have to do a huge corporate reset. Radically different business models. It is a severe deterioration between day 1, day 30, and day 100. and I'm definitely speculating. We're firmly in speculation station now. My personal belief is I think they knew, and maybe she knew, that like the day 100 memo was written 100 days ago. Like, that's not presenting information that they didn't know. It's not like they didn't know they were at 3% margin. They've only made $16 billion out of the first 3 quarters of the year. So they knew, they were able to project that they're probably going to come in. They're probably going to come in somewhere between 18 and 22 billion, but I think closer to the 18 to 19 billion side. Maybe between 19 and 20 billion. They already knew how far down they were. This isn't new information. So my personal belief is this has all been a carefully crafted and carefully orchestrated, right, symphony of deteriorating messaging, right, to everybody to smooth them into what's going to happen. I don't think any of this was unknown. I don't think there's no way that it was unknown that $20 billion have been spent, right, in addition to what they spent for ATVI and Bethesda. None of that information's new. The doom and gloom in the sky is falling. That script was written months ago. The fact that it's being released now, it's in my opinion, it's all been carefully crafted, right? It's reinforce people's confidence. Don't make them mass panic. Day 30, let people know things are not rosy and shiny, but we're going to continue to fight. Day 100, tell people that this is lifeboat Earth, and there's not enough room in the lifeboats for everybody who's on the ship. It's my personal belief. The last thing that I'll walk out the door with is this bit about how I personally feel about everything that's going on at Xbox. Make great games. This is a story that I wrote on my blog, Rounding Off Infinity, called Xbox is Responsible for Xbox. I don't care about Game Pass, Play Anywhere. This is an Xbox. Everything is an Xbox. Cloud, Smart Buy, Cross Buy, Velocity, Architecture, Xbox FanFest World Tour, logos and boot up screens. Like I tried to tell people that was all a smokescreen and all a placebo and all just an IV, right, from the very beginning. And that is turning out to be exactly what it is. Like, and this is again a thing. You're at a 3% margin, but you're throwing Xbox FanFest, and you have journalists writing that they walked into the Xbox FanFest and it was like the Taj Mahal, right? It was like the riches of Caesar. It was all this ostentatious decoration and stuff, as if to tell people that things are okay. And you're going to do this 8 times, and you're at 3% margin, and this is where you're spending your money. Again, back to how I personally feel. Because what goes hand in hand with that is all of the exclusives are antiquated. Now we need exclusives. You might need to upgrade your PC to play Starfield. Redfield is a miss, but we're seeing good engagement in Game Pass, so how big of a miss is it? And other greatest hits of their PR and marketing. In my opinion, Xbox needs to STFU and focus on providing me great games. And I have not played a great Xbox game since last gen. I loved Avowed and South of Midnight, but those things did not shake the earth. Fable is the first thing of that ilk, in my opinion, in a long time that I've seen. I'm not here for Xbox stuff that they have been doing for 2.5 decades and dressing it back up. So Gears of War E-Day, Forza Horizon 6, quite honestly, and Elder Scrolls 6 are all going to kind of be rehashes that don't move the bar that far beyond the designs that have, racetracks that have already been laid. Zero interest in Gears E-Day, zero interest in Halo Combat Evolved. I've played that campaign in terms of Halo Combat Evolved a half dozen times. For me, they need to move the needle in the art forward. I only care about exclusives if they allow teams to code close to the metal, keep the dev cycle tight, and minimize defects, extract the max from the singular hardware set, and use the spare capacity to move the art and design forward, and focus on great performances. I personally do not see that in E-Day or Combat Evolved. I do see that in Fable. You bring in Haley Atwell. That tells me, in my opinion, you're showing more of a concern about storytelling and bringing in Hollywood-level talent for great performances. My comparator here is you look over at Naughty Dog. You have Ashley Johnson moving everyone to tears on the Naughty Dog set, making everyone have to take 10 after the Joel die scene on the mocap set for TLU 2. Ashley talked about how she was hoarse, how she couldn't, because of the multiple takes, she couldn't yell out and scream as loudly as she wanted to. Just telling me that, she just poured all the emotion out of her and left it on the floor. on that mocap studio. And that's the level of performance that I'm talking about. And that's a level of performance that sets a bar where you have S-tier studios winning awards and setting new critical bars that the developer community acknowledges and sees when you look at the awards these games garner at GDC and DICE. So that's what I'm looking for from Xbox. They have the resources. There's no excuse. So my personal opinion, all of this menagerie and Ashley and Ashley scripting this whole soap opera that's gone on this week up in Vought Tower, right, to make the 7 like a big deal, right, which is about how many Xbox executives you have now. We used to just have Booty and Phil and Sarah, and now it seems like there's 7 of them running around. So that's what I'm going to start calling them. It's the 7, and they're all operating off of a script being written in Vought Tower at Vought International. So, like, none of these things matter to me personally as a gamer. They just need to make great video games. All right, so we'll walk out of here with the last catch-up on the chat. Josh Ayer says, the slow death of Xbox. Hero says, Gears of War EA Change of Mind edition definitely coming by fall of 2027. Free Xboxes too. Josh Ayer says, wasting money. Real Nice says, bro, they were so hyped coming back from FanFest. I was like, that's a lot of money they're spending entertaining y'all and giving away about 350 Xbox 25th anniversary editions. Yeah, and they're going to do this like 7 more times, right? To the tune of about probably $2 million when I ran the math. Real Nate says the Xbox exclusive part looked like the food was laid out like the Last Supper party. Agreed, voice acting like that is what it takes. Chester says nailed it. Okay, so there was something here I wanted to pull the thread on. Yeah, but this is like this. Innate brings it up. Like you went to FanFest and you were told everything is great. The sky is rosy. Here go your 25th anniversary Xboxes. We're bringing back exclusives. Get ready for this big hit parade. And then this day 100 memo drop. The day 100 memo was clearly drafted while you guys were at FanFest. So if you don't understand that they were in your face telling you a good news story at FanFest and then drop this 100-day memo that they are, like, if they were any other business, they would be at risk from going under because they're making 3 cents for every dollar of sales that they make. If you do not understand that you have been manipulated, played, like, that they have been predatory, like, you don't get it. And I don't understand how you continue to invest your own persona, 2 decades of your life into this brand and this company to assert that the games are coming. She's talking about she wants to be the best gaming and entertainment company by 2030. By 2030, it will have been 17 years of this mess. 2 decades. Some of you guys will have had kids. Some of you guys who already had kids, those kids will have graduated from high school and be off in college, and you guys are still talking about waiting for this brand to turn it around. And this is 2 iterations in the last 8 months where they have been, across 2 different regimes, where they have been in your face. Because at Tokyo Game Show, a bunch of you guys went out there and were told a good news story, everything is healthy, everything is fine, we're bringing the fight back. And then you flew back, and that week they told you Game Pass was going up to $30, and they didn't say one word to you about that bad news while you were out there in Japan rubbing shoulders with them. And they've done it again under a different leadership team. And if you don't understand that this is the program, this is the shtick, this is the culture, this is all planned in boardrooms, in closed doors, like, how do you guys not get it? Like, I don't understand. And people are reading articles by Jez Corden at Windows Central and taking them at face value and not understanding that he is a low-level informant working for the mob, who the mob is going to cast off, right, and sacrifice him to the feds when the feds come looking for them for RICO. Like, I don't understand how you guys don't get this structure. I don't understand how you guys don't get this house of cards led by the cast of Pretty Little Liars. Like, I don't get it. But, that's what it is. And here we are. Thanks so much for coming to the show and swinging through tonight. I appreciate it. I would have preferred having a different agenda. I actually don't enjoy talking about this stuff, but I think it's necessary because so much misinformation and disinformation gets put out, and so much insanity gets spoken around this stuff that is completely detached from objectivity and just looking at the numbers. And all types of craziness is concocted on what these numbers mean and a lack of understanding of the financial terms. So I think it's necessary at least that there's some content out there that refutes a lot of that craziness and actually puts it back in domain expertise terms and decomposes it and really talks about the causality behind some of these things and the effects and where it's potentially going to lead. And again, none of this is for me to tell you that I'm right. This is just to give you a perspective. What I constantly say is I hope people hear maybe what I say that causes them to ask questions. You go back and you listen to other people and hear their perspective, and then you aggregate that and synthesize it and arrive at your own conclusions. I don't care that you believe me. I care that you get information, and then you can go off and decide and believe whatever you want. So thanks a lot for everybody who swung through. It's tough for me to run down the list of names, but thanks a lot. Hero Down Under, Real Innate, Josh Ayers, Rachie, RPG88, and anybody else who happened to swing through who I didn't see in the chat. For anybody who happens to watch the archive version of this podcast on the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, please feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can just receive a notification whenever I post new content. The game Memo is back, so I plan on doing this once a week. Hopefully it will not necessarily be having to dig into the financials and talk about it every week. Hopefully it's not to talk about Xbox every week. That's not my intention or my desire. There should hopefully be other things going in the news. But like I said, when I went around to read the gaming news, this is what was at the top of the feed everywhere. So I appreciate you guys coming through. I appreciate everybody who came through in the live chat. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Stay safe out there. Play the games that you like. Come here to talk to me about the games that you love. Once again, my name has been Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube. One of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going weekly video games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. That show goes live Sunday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And we will be on this Sunday. We have come through Summer Game Fest and dealing with the flex schedule and all that. And so we should be back on our regular format this Sunday. I'm hoping you guys will swing through there as well. Until next time, good night, good luck, and good gaming. That's going to do it for me. I'm out of here.